The laughter cut through Margaret like a knife as she stepped onto the platform, her generous figure drawing snickers from the crowd gathered at the small-town station. But when a tall stranger with gentle eyes stepped forward to claim her as his own, Margaret realized this moment would either be the beginning of her greatest humiliation or the first day of a life she'd never dared to imagine. The train pulled into the small-town station, kicking up dust that danced around the platform. A few townsfolk stood by, watching with curious eyes. They whispered among themselves, eager to know who had arrived. The door of the train opened, and a woman stepped down. Her name was Margaret. She was overweight, and her bright dress stood out against the dull colors of the town. The vibrant colors clashed with the muted rural setting. In her hands, she held a suitcase and a stack of letters. Her face showed hope and worry at the same time. The laughter of the crowd was sharp. They made jokes about her size and appearance. It stung. Margaret's cheeks flushed as she felt their eyes on her. She wanted to shrink away, to disappear. But she stood tall, clutching her belongings tightly. From a distance, Thomas observed the scene. He was a tall man with gentle eyes. He felt troubled by the townsfolk's cruelty. He could see how Margaret was being treated. He could feel her pain even from afar. As the crowd continued to jeer, something shifted inside Thomas. He decided to step forward. His heart raced as he moved closer to Margaret. He approached her, surprising everyone around. He introduced himself. He said he had been waiting for her. Margaret blinked in surprise. She had not expected anyone to come for her. She looked into his eyes and saw sincerity there. The townsfolk raised their eyebrows in disbelief. They could not understand why Thomas would stand by her. But he did not care about their judgment. He stood firm beside Margaret. Together, they left the station. The laughter of the crowd followed them. But Thomas remained unfazed. He walked with purpose, signaling a bond forming between them. As they walked, Margaret felt a mix of emotions. She felt grateful for Thomas's kindness. Yet, she still felt the weight of the crowd's laughter. It echoed in her ears. The wagon was waiting for them. Thomas helped Margaret climb in. The wooden seat creaked under their weight. Dust settled around them as the wagon started to move. The road was long and bumpy. They rode in silence for a while, the only sound being the creaking of the wagon. Margaret looked out at the fields passing by. She thought about her life and what brought her here. Finally, she spoke. She shared her story. She talked about her struggles with self-acceptance. She told Thomas about her dreams of starting anew. Her voice was soft but steady. Thomas listened carefully. He shared his own past too. He told her how he had faced mockery for pursuing his passions. They found common ground in their experiences. As they traveled, dark clouds gathered above. An unexpected storm rolled in. The wind picked up, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Thomas spotted a barn on the side of the road. He urged the horses toward it. They rushed inside just as the storm broke loose. The rain poured down outside, loud and heavy. Inside the barn, the air was cool. Margaret felt a sense of relief wash over her. They found a quiet corner and sat down, away from the rain. In the barn, they shared their fears. They laughed at the storm outside. The sound of their laughter filled the space. In that moment, the world outside faded away. Margaret felt a connection growing between them. She realized Thomas was different from the townsfolk. He saw her for who she was, not just her appearance. As the rain continued to fall, they talked more. They shared their dreams and hopes. Margaret opened up about her desire to create a new life. Thomas encouraged her, telling her she could be whoever she wanted to be. When the storm finally passed, the sun peeked through the clouds. A rainbow appeared in the sky, brightening the landscape. It felt like a sign of hope. They returned to the wagon, their spirits lifted. The air was fresh, and the world felt new. Margaret smiled for the first time since she had arrived. Thomas helped her into the wagon again. They resumed their journey, feeling lighter. The bond between them had deepened, and Margaret felt less alone. As they approached Thomas's home, she looked around with new eyes. The small farm came into view, with fields stretching out on either side. It was a simple place, but it felt inviting. Thomas parked the wagon by the cabin. He turned to Margaret and smiled. He welcomed her to his home. She took a deep breath, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Inside the cabin, Margaret looked around. The space was cozy but worn. It had a charm of its own. She noticed small details, like the handmade crafts on the shelves. Thomas offered her a seat at the table. He brought out a pitcher of water and poured them both a glass. They sat together, enjoying the quiet. Margaret began to unpack her suitcase. She took out her books and crafts. Each item told a story of her past. She hoped to show them to Thomas one day. but the fear of judgment lingered. She knew the townsfolk would not easily accept her. Still, she felt determined to make a place for herself. Thomas noticed her hesitation. He encouraged her to join a community gathering happening soon. He sensed that it would be a good chance for her to meet others. Margaret felt reluctant. She worried about how the townsfolk would treat her. But Thomas reassured her. He told her they would face it together. As they prepared for the gathering, Margaret's confidence began to grow. She felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a place in this new town. Together, they worked side by side, preparing for the gathering. Margaret felt a warmth in her heart. She was not alone anymore. And for the first time, she started to believe that she could truly belong. The day of the community gathering arrived. The sun shone brightly in the sky. Thomas and Margaret prepared to go together. Margaret felt a mix of excitement and fear. She wanted to fit in, but she remembered the laughter from the station. Thomas noticed her anxiety. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He reminded her that she was not alone. They would face the townsfolk together. His steady gaze gave her strength. As they walked toward the gathering, Margaret took deep breaths. The path was lined with trees, their branches swaying gently. The sounds of laughter and chatter grew louder as they approached. When they arrived, Margaret felt her heart race. The gathering was held in the town square. People were setting up tables and decorations. Margaret spotted familiar faces among the crowd. She felt the weight of their stares. Whispers floated through the air, sharp and unkind. Some townsfolk snickered as she stepped forward. Margaret's cheeks burned, but she stood tall. She was determined not to let them see her fear. Thomas walked beside her, his presence a shield against their judgment. He greeted people warmly, introducing Margaret with pride. His confidence made her feel a little braver. Margaret decided to showcase her crafts. It was a bold move, but she felt it was time to step out. She set up her table with care. Colorful items filled the space: handmade crafts, painted stones, and knitted scarves. As she arranged her things, she felt eyes on her. The crowd was curious, but not all of them were kind. Some whispered among themselves, while others laughed at her creations. But Margaret took a deep breath and began to speak. She shared the stories behind her crafts. She explained how she made each piece with love and care. At first, the crowd was quiet. They listened, captivated by her passion. Margaret saw some faces soften, and it gave her courage. She spoke louder, her voice gaining strength. Then, a cruel voice broke through the moment. A townsman, known for his harsh words, stepped forward. He tried to belittle her work. He mocked her for thinking her crafts were worth showing. Margaret's heart sank. The laughter returned, but this time it felt sharper. She wanted to shrink away, but Thomas stood beside her. He stepped forward, his expression fierce. He defended Margaret fiercely. He spoke about her talents and the effort she put into her work. He challenged the townsmen, demanding respect for Margaret. The crowd fell silent. They had not expected Thomas to stand up like that. His words resonated, and some began to nod in agreement. Margaret felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. With the tension thick in the air, she decided not to back down. She continued to speak, her voice steady. She shared how crafting brought her joy and peace. She encouraged others to find their own passions. Slowly, some townsfolk began to step forward. They were drawn by her spirit. They asked questions about her crafts and shared their own interests. This shift surprised Margaret. As the gathering continued, more people joined in. They shared stories of their own struggles and dreams. Margaret felt a connection growing among them. The townsfolk began to see her differently. No longer was she just the woman from the train. She was Margaret, a person with talents and a voice. As the sun began to set, the atmosphere changed. Laughter replaced the earlier mockery. The townsfolk started to share their own crafts, inspired by Margaret's courage. By the end of the gathering, Margaret felt a sense of belonging. The support from Thomas and the acceptance from the townsfolk lifted her spirits. As they walked home, Margaret's heart was light. She felt proud of herself for standing up. She had faced her fears and found strength in her voice. Thomas smiled at her, clearly pleased. He told her he was proud of her for speaking out. Margaret beamed, feeling warmth spread through her. That night, as they settled into the cabin, Margaret reflected on the day. She felt hopeful about her future. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but she was ready to face them. With Thomas by her side, she felt she could take on the world. Margaret was beginning to believe in herself. She was not just an outsider anymore. She was part of something bigger. The town was changing, and so was she. The bond between Margaret and Thomas deepened. They were building a life together, one step at a time. Margaret looked forward to the next gathering. She would continue to share her crafts and her story. With each passing day, she was finding her place in the world. And for the first time, she felt truly free. After the gathering, life began to settle into a new routine for Margaret and Thomas. Each morning, they woke up to the sounds of nature. Birds chirped outside their cabin, and the sun streamed through the windows. It was a peaceful way to start the day. One morning, as they sat at the kitchen table, Thomas suggested they take a trip to town for supplies. Margaret agreed. She enjoyed these outings. They gave her a chance to interact with more townsfolk. As they walked through the town, Margaret felt more confident. She greeted people with a smile. Some returned her greeting, while others still looked away. But she didn't let it bother her as much. At the general store, Thomas helped her pick out supplies for her crafts. He encouraged her to buy new colors of paint and more yarn. Margaret felt excitement growing. She had plans for new projects. After shopping, they decided to grab lunch at a small cafe. The cafe was busy, filled with townsfolk chatting and laughing. Thomas and Margaret found a table in the corner. As they ate, they talked about their dreams. Thomas shared his hopes for the farm. He wanted to expand the fields and grow more crops. Margaret listened intently, feeling inspired by his passion. Then she shared her own dreams. She wanted to hold a workshop for the townsfolk, teaching them how to create crafts. Thomas's eyes lit up at the idea. He encouraged her to go for it. After lunch, they walked back home. The sun warmed their backs, and the air was fresh. Margaret felt a sense of purpose. She wanted to make her mark in this town. Once home, she began to plan her workshop. She took out her notes and sketches, excited to bring her ideas to life. She wanted to create a safe space for people to express themselves. Days passed, and Margaret prepared for the workshop. She gathered materials and created a flyer to share. Thomas helped her spread the word around town. As the day of the workshop approached, Margaret felt nerves creeping in. She worried about how many people would come. Would they take her seriously? Would they laugh at her again? On the morning of the workshop, Margaret woke up early. She felt anxious but determined. She set up the tables outside, arranging everything neatly. She wanted it to be welcoming. Thomas was by her side, offering support. He encouraged her to breathe and stay positive. He reminded her that this was her chance to shine. As the sun climbed higher, people began to arrive. Some were curious, while others were hesitant. Margaret greeted each person with a warm smile. Once everyone was gathered, she introduced herself. She explained the purpose of the workshop. She wanted to create a space where they could all learn and share. At first, the group was quiet. Some looked unsure, but Margaret pressed on. She demonstrated a simple craft project, showing them step by step. Slowly, hands began to reach for the materials. People started to create alongside her. Margaret felt a rush of joy as she saw their creativity come to life. As the workshop continued, laughter filled the air. Conversations sparked among the participants. They shared ideas, stories, and even their insecurities. Margaret felt her heart swell. This was what she had dreamed of, a community coming together. She encouraged everyone, praising their efforts and celebrating their uniqueness. One woman, who had been quiet at first, began to open up. She shared her own struggles with self-doubt. Margaret listened, empathizing with her feelings. The connection between them deepened. Margaret realized they were all there for the same reason, to find joy in creation and support one another. As the workshop wrapped up, Margaret felt a sense of accomplishment. Everyone left with smiles and newfound friendships. Margaret knew she had made a difference. When Thomas arrived to help clean up, he noticed the glow on her face. He asked how it went, and she couldn't contain her excitement. She shared stories of the connections made and the laughter shared. Thomas beamed with pride. He told her how amazing she was for bringing people together. Margaret felt warmth spread through her. His support meant the world to her. Later that night, they sat outside under the stars. The night was peaceful, and the air was cool. Margaret felt a sense of peace wash over her. She reflected on how far she had come. Just weeks ago, she had arrived in town feeling lost. Now, she had found her place. She had built connections and created a community. Thomas turned to her, his eyes shining. He expressed how proud he was of her. He admired her courage and creativity. Margaret felt a rush of happiness. As they sat together, Margaret realized something important. She had not only found a home in the town, she had found a partner in Thomas. Their bond deepened with each passing day. They supported each other's dreams and faced challenges together. Margaret felt grateful for the love and acceptance they had built. The next morning, she woke up with renewed energy. She was ready to take on the world. With Thomas by her side, she felt unstoppable. Together, they would continue to change the town. They would inspire others to embrace their true selves. Margaret looked forward to what the future would bring, and in her heart, she knew she was finally home. The days passed quickly after the workshop. Margaret felt a new energy in the town. People were starting to recognize her. They greeted her with smiles, and she felt more accepted. One sunny morning, Thomas suggested they host a community gathering at their farm. He believed it would be a great way for everyone to come together and celebrate. Margaret loved the idea. She felt excited to bring people to their home. They began planning the gathering together. Margaret wanted to prepare food and activities. She suggested games for the children and crafts for the adults. Thomas agreed and offered to cook some of his favorite dishes. As they worked side by side, Margaret felt a growing sense of partnership with Thomas. They made a great team. She appreciated how he listened to her ideas and built on them. They spent days preparing. Margaret baked pies and prepared salads, while Thomas worked on grilling meats. They decorated the yard with colorful flowers and banners. The farm looked inviting and cheerful. On the day of the gathering, the sun shone brightly. Margaret felt a mix of excitement and nerves. She wanted everything to be perfect. As guests began to arrive, she greeted each one with a warm smile. The yard filled up with families, children running and laughing. Margaret watched as people mingled. She felt a sense of joy seeing the community come together. Thomas welcomed everyone, his warm presence putting people at ease. He led them to the tables where the food was laid out. The aroma of grilled meats and baked goods filled the air. As they all gathered to eat, Margaret took a moment to observe. She noticed conversations blooming around her. People were sharing stories, laughing, and enjoying the food. After the meal, Margaret suggested they play some games. She had organized a few fun activities, including a sack race and a craft station. The children cheered, eager to join in. As the games began, Margaret felt a sense of pride. She watched as families competed and played together. The laughter of children echoed across the yard, and it warmed her heart. Thomas joined in the fun, making everyone laugh with his playful spirit. He cheered for the kids and encouraged them to do their best. Margaret felt grateful for his ability to bring joy to others. As the sun began to set, the atmosphere grew even more magical. The sky turned shades of pink and orange. People gathered around a small bonfire that Thomas had prepared. With the fire crackling, they sat together, sharing stories and laughter. Margaret felt a sense of belonging wash over her. She looked around at the faces of her neighbors, now friends. One woman approached Margaret, her eyes shining. She thanked her for organizing the gathering. She expressed how much it meant to have a space for everyone to connect. Margaret felt her heart swell. She realized this was what she had wanted all along, a community where people could come together. As the night went on, Thomas took out his guitar. He began to play soft tunes that filled the air. People joined in, singing songs together. The atmosphere was filled with warmth and joy. Margaret sat beside Thomas, feeling a deep connection. They shared smiles and laughter, enjoying the moment. In that space, everything felt right. Later, as the stars lit up the night sky, Margaret felt a wave of gratitude. She thought about how far she had come. She had faced her fears and found friends. When the gathering began to wind down, people started to say their goodbyes. Everyone left with smiles, promising to come back soon. Margaret felt fulfilled. Thomas took her hand, squeezing it gently. He told her how proud he was of her for bringing everyone together. Margaret smiled back, feeling a warmth spread in her chest. As they cleaned up, they shared stories of the night. Margaret recounted funny moments, and Thomas laughed along. She felt a deep bond growing between them. That night, as they settled into bed, Margaret reflected on the day. She realized hosting the gathering had strengthened her place in the community. She felt more confident than ever. Thomas turned to her, his eyes filled with admiration. He told her that she had a gift for bringing people together. Margaret felt her cheeks flush with happiness. In the days that followed, Margaret continued to connect with her neighbors. She organized more craft workshops, and the attendance grew each time. People started to look forward to her sessions. With every gathering, Margaret felt more at home. She began to understand the importance of community. It was about support, friendship, and shared experiences. One afternoon, while working on a new craft project, Margaret received a letter. It was from Reverend Packer, the town's minister. He expressed how he had noticed the positive changes in the community. The letter encouraged her to keep going. It praised her efforts to connect people. Margaret felt a rush of joy. She had received recognition for her hard work. That evening, she shared the letter with Thomas. He beamed with pride, telling her it was a sign that they were making a difference. Together, they celebrated with a small dinner. Margaret felt grateful for Thomas's support. He had stood by her side through every challenge. Their bond felt unbreakable, and she cherished it deeply. As she drifted off to sleep that night, she knew they were building something special. Together, they were creating a home filled with love, acceptance, and community. And for Margaret, that was everything she had ever dreamed of. The days turned into weeks, and Margaret continued to grow within the community. Her workshops flourished, and people looked forward to them. The laughter and creativity filled the air each time, bringing everyone closer together. One afternoon, as Margaret prepared for her new workshop, she felt excited. She had planned an art session focused on painting. She hoped to inspire others to express themselves. As the participants arrived, Margaret greeted each of them with a smile. She felt a sense of warmth in the room as they gathered. The space buzzed with anticipation. However, not everyone was welcoming. A few townsfolk still held on to their judgments of Margaret. Rumors began to spread again. Some claimed she was trying to take over the community with her workshops. Margaret overheard whispers as she set up the materials. It stung, but she reminded herself of how far she had come. Thomas had always encouraged her to rise above negativity. As the workshop started, she focused on her participants. She showed them how to mix colors and create their own paintings. The room filled with laughter and chatter, and Margaret felt uplifted. But as the workshop progressed, one woman, Clara, entered the room. She held a stern expression and crossed her arms. Clara was known for her harsh words and skepticism. Margaret felt a knot form in her stomach. She tried to ignore Clara's presence, focusing on the others. But Clara's eyes followed her, and the tension was palpable. During a break, Clara approached Margaret. Her voice was cold as she questioned the purpose of the workshops. She asked if Margaret was trying to make a name for herself at the expense of the community. Margaret felt her heart race. She took a breath and spoke calmly. She explained that her goal was to bring people together, to create a space for creativity and support. But Clara wasn't convinced. She raised her voice, saying that Margaret didn't belong in their town. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to them. Margaret's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She felt the weight of the crowd's stares. But she took another deep breath and stood her ground. She reminded everyone of the positive changes they had experienced together. She spoke about how the workshops had allowed them to bond and share their stories. Thomas, who had been watching from the side, stepped forward. He stood beside Margaret, supporting her. He addressed Clara, defending Margaret's efforts. He spoke about community spirit and how everyone deserved a chance. Clara scoffed at Thomas, but he didn't back down. He urged the townsfolk to remember the joy they had found in the workshops. He encouraged them to embrace each other's differences. Seeing Thomas stand up for her gave Margaret strength. She felt the warmth of the crowd's support. They began to nod and murmur in agreement with Thomas. Margaret took this moment to share her own story. She talked about the struggles she had faced before arriving in town. She explained how she had found hope and purpose through creativity. Her honesty resonated with many in the room. Some people began to share their experiences too. They spoke about their fears and dreams, finding common ground. Slowly, Clara's stern expression softened. She began to listen, and the tension in the room eased. The atmosphere shifted from hostility to understanding. By the end of the workshop, Margaret felt a sense of victory. The participants left with smiles, and many expressed gratitude for the space she had created. As the crowd dispersed, Clara approached Margaret again. This time, her tone was different. She admitted she had been wrong to judge. She apologized for her harsh words and thanked Margaret for her honesty. Margaret felt a wave of relief wash over her. She accepted Clara's apology with grace. She knew that change could take time, but this was a step forward. Outside, Thomas waiting for her, a proud smile on his face. He praised her for standing up for herself and the community. Margaret felt her heart swell with gratitude. That evening, as they sat on the porch, they reflected on the day. Thomas expressed how important it was to face challenges head-on. He reminded her that change often started with courage. Margaret felt grateful for Thomas's support. They had faced a difficult moment together, and it had strengthened their bond. She realized how important it was to have someone by her side. In the weeks that followed, the community began to change. More townsfolk joined Margaret's workshops, and the atmosphere was filled with creativity and acceptance. People started to share their talents and stories. The workshops became a place of connection, where everyone felt valued. Margaret felt proud of what they had built together. One day, as they walked through town, they noticed a news sign at the center. It read, "Community Craft Fair coming soon." Margaret felt a spark of excitement. Thomas noticed her enthusiasm. He encouraged her to get involved in organizing the fair. Margaret felt nervous but eager. This was another chance to bring the community together. As they discussed ideas, Margaret felt inspired. She envisioned the fair filled with booths showcasing local crafts, food, and activities. She wanted it to be a celebration of their talents. Over the next few weeks, Margaret poured her heart into planning the fair. She reached out to local artisans and encouraged everyone to participate. On the day of the fair, the town square buzzed with energy. Colorful stalls lined the streets, and laughter filled the air. Margaret felt a sense of pride as she watched people engage and connect. Thomas stood by her side, his presence a steady support. Together, they celebrated the beauty of community. Margaret knew that they had created something special. As the sun set on the fair, Margaret felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had faced challenges and built bridges within her community. She had found her place, and she was finally home. The community craft fair was a great success. People gathered to celebrate, showcasing their talents and sharing their stories. Margaret felt a sense of pride as she walked through the bustling square. She admired the colorful booths, filled with handmade crafts, delicious foods, and joyful faces. The energy in the air was infectious. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. As she moved from stall to stall, she noticed familiar faces. Neighbors greeted her with smiles, thanking her for organizing the fair. Margaret felt a warm glow of happiness. She had seen the town come together in a way she had always dreamed of. However, amidst the joy, she sensed an undercurrent of tension. A few townsfolk still whispered amongst themselves, casting sideways glances at Margaret and her supporters. It worried her, but she tried to focus on the celebration. Later in the day, a group of women approached Margaret's booth. They were excited to see her work and wanted to learn. Margaret felt a thrill of joy at their interest. She eagerly showed them her crafts and offered tips. As they chatted, one woman, Sarah, brought up a concern. She mentioned that some in town were still skeptical of Margaret's place in the community. Margaret felt a pang in her heart but remained composed. She listened to Sarah, who expressed her desire for everyone to feel included. Margaret assured her that she was committed to building connections. She believed in the power of community and creativity. As the day continued, Margaret noticed Clara watching from a distance. Clara's expression was hard to read. Margaret felt nervous but decided to approach her. When she reached Clara, she greeted her warmly. Clara looked surprised but slowly returned the greeting. Margaret could sense a shift in Clara's energy. They began to talk about the fair. Clara shared her thoughts about the importance of events like this in bringing the town together. Margaret felt encouraged by Clara's openness. But just as they were finding common ground, a loud voice interrupted them. It was a man named Frank, known for his strong opinions. He stepped forward, questioning Margaret's role in the community. Frank accused her of trying to change the town too quickly. He claimed that she didn't understand their traditions. The crowd around them fell silent, tension thick in the air. Margaret felt her heart race. She glanced at Thomas, who was watching from a distance, concern on his face. But she took a deep breath and prepared to respond. She spoke calmly, explaining her love for the town and its people. She emphasized her desire to enhance their community, not change it. Margaret reminded everyone that they could honor their traditions while embracing new ideas. Frank didn't back down. He argued that change was not always good. He insisted that the town should stick to what they knew. The crowd wavered, caught between Margaret and Frank. Margaret felt the weight of their eyes on her, but she refused to let fear take over. She turned to the crowd, asking them to share their thoughts. One by one, people began to speak up. They shared how they had enjoyed the workshops and the fair. They expressed gratitude for the connections they had made. Slowly, the tide began to shift. More townsfolk voiced their support for Margaret. They recognized the positive impact she had brought to the community. Seeing this, Frank's expression changed. He looked around, realizing he was losing support. He tried to argue, but his voice was growing weaker. With the crowd rallying behind her, Margaret took the opportunity to invite everyone to come together. She proposed regular community gatherings to celebrate their talents and bring everyone closer. The crowd erupted in applause. They cheered for the idea, and Margaret felt a rush of joy. Thomas joined her side, beaming with pride. In that moment, Margaret knew they had made progress. She had faced a challenge and come out stronger. The community was embracing change, and she felt grateful to be part of it. As the fair drew to a close, Margaret felt a sense of fulfillment. She had stood up for herself and her vision, and people had listened. The next day, Margaret and Thomas sat on the porch, reflecting on the fair. They talked about the challenges they had faced and the support they had received. Thomas praised Margaret for her courage. He reminded her that change takes time, but with patience and perseverance, they could make a difference. Margaret felt grateful for his unwavering support. He had always believed in her, even when times were tough. She realized how much he meant to her. As they enjoyed the sunset, a sense of hope filled the air. Margaret was excited about the future and the changes they would bring together. In the weeks that followed, Margaret continued to organize community gatherings. The atmosphere grew warmer and more inviting. People began to embrace each other's differences, and friendships blossomed. One afternoon, Margaret received a letter from Reverend Packer. He expressed his appreciation for her efforts in uniting the town. He invited her to speak at the next town meeting about the workshops and gatherings. Margaret felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Speaking at the meeting would be a significant step. She shared the news with Thomas, who encouraged her to take the opportunity. On the day of the meeting, Margaret stood before the townsfolk, her heart pounding. She shared her journey and the importance of community. She spoke of the joy they had found in supporting one another. As she finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Margaret felt a wave of relief and happiness wash over her. She had faced her fears and found her voice. That night, as she celebrated with Thomas, she realized how far she had come. Together, they had built a community filled with love and acceptance. Margaret knew they would continue to face challenges, but she felt ready. With Thomas by her side, she was determined to keep pushing forward. And that felt like a promise of a brighter future for everyone in the town. As the weeks went by, Margaret felt the community growing stronger. The gatherings continued to flourish, and people were more connected than ever. She had created a space where everyone felt valued and accepted. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, a new challenge emerged. Rumors began to spread about a group from a neighboring town. They were known for their strong opinions and resistance to change. Margaret learned that they planned to visit her town during one of the upcoming gatherings. She felt a knot of worry form in her stomach. What if they brought negativity? What if they tried to disrupt the progress they had made? Thomas noticed her unease. He took her hand and reassured her. He reminded her that they had built a supportive community. Together, they could face any challenge that came their way. Determined to prepare, Margaret called a meeting with the townsfolk. She wanted to discuss the potential visit and how to respond. When they gathered, she felt a mix of anxiety and hope. As she spoke, she shared her concerns. She encouraged everyone to remain united and focus on the positive changes they had created. She reminded them that their strength lay in their connection. The townsfolk listened intently. One by one, they expressed their support for Margaret and their commitment to standing together. They agreed that they would not let outside negativity affect their community. After the meeting, Margaret felt a renewed sense of purpose. With the support of the townsfolk, she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. On the day of the gathering, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Margaret and Thomas set up the area, ensuring everything was welcoming. They decorated the space with flowers and colorful banners. As the gathering began, people arrived, filling the square with excitement. Margaret felt a sense of pride as she saw familiar faces. She had worked hard to create a sense of belonging. But as the event continued, the group from the neighboring town arrived. They stood at the edge of the gathering, watching with disapproving looks. Margaret felt her heart race. Thomas noticed her tension and squeezed her hand. He encouraged her to stay focused on the people who had come to support their community. Margaret took a deep breath and stepped forward to greet the newcomers. She welcomed them warmly, hoping to bridge the gap. But their response was cold. They questioned her efforts and accused her of disrupting tradition. Margaret felt her heart sink. She knew she had to stand her ground. She calmly explained her vision for the community, emphasizing the importance of inclusivity and growth. The group responded with skepticism. They argued that change would ruin the town's identity. Margaret felt the weight of their words, but she refused to back down. She turned to the townsfolk who had gathered around her. She reminded them of the progress they had made together. She encouraged them to share their own stories of change and connection. One by one, people began to speak up. They shared how the workshops had brought them closer and how they had found support in one another. Margaret felt a wave of strength as the crowd rallied behind her. Seeing the bond among the townsfolk, the group from the neighboring town looked uneasy. They had not expected such unity. Margaret pressed on, inviting everyone to celebrate the positive changes they had created. As the gathering continued, the atmosphere shifted. The townsfolk laughed and interacted, showcasing their talents and sharing stories. The joy of the event began to overshadow the negativity. Margaret felt a surge of hope. She realized that the strength of their community was greater than any outside influence. The bond they had formed was unbreakable. As the day progressed, the group from the neighboring town began to retreat. They could see that their negativity was not welcomed. Margaret felt relief wash over her. By the end of the gathering, Margaret stood surrounded by her neighbors. They celebrated their success, knowing they had faced a challenge together and emerged stronger. Thomas stood beside her, pride shining in his eyes. He reminded her that they had shown the power of community. Margaret felt a deep sense of gratitude for the love and support around her. That night, as they sat on the porch, Margaret reflected on the day. She realized that challenges would always come, but it was how they faced them that mattered. Thomas took her hand and squeezed it gently. He reminded her that they had built a home filled with acceptance and love. Margaret felt a warmth spread through her. In the days that followed, they continued to foster connections within the community. They organized more workshops and gatherings, always focusing on inclusion and support. Margaret had grown in ways she had never imagined. She had found her voice and learned the importance of standing up for what was right. As the seasons changed, so did the town. People began to embrace differences and celebrate individuality. Margaret felt grateful to be part of this transformation. One evening, as they prepared for another gathering, Thomas turned to Margaret. He shared how proud he was of her journey. He admired her courage and dedication to the community. Margaret felt a rush of emotions. She realized how much Thomas meant to her. He had supported her every step of the way. With a smile, she took his hand and whispered her appreciation. They both knew they had created something beautiful together. The story of their town was not just about Margaret or Thomas. It was about everyone coming together. They had built a place where love, acceptance, and creativity thrived. And as they looked toward the future, they knew that together, they could face anything. Their bond had transformed not just their lives but the entire community. Margaret felt a sense of fulfillment. She had found her place, her purpose, and her home. And in that moment, she knew they were just getting started.